Rancher found a bleeding woman and 7 kids. His next move shook all of Montana. The wind was just starting to pick up across the wide Montana plains when Jed Dalton spotted something strange near the old cattle trail, a flicker of color where there shouldn't have been any. It was sunrise, the sky still painted in pale lavender, and Jed had been out checking the fences after a long night of restless sleep he couldn't quite explain. Something in him had told him to saddle up early, to ride out before the rest of the world woke. That's when he saw it, a cluster of small shapes huddled together like shadows clinging to the ground. And at the center, a woman, a stranger, slumped over, her shirt stained dark with blood. Jed's heart slammed against his ribs. He kicked his horse into a gallop. "Hey," he shouted, sliding off the saddle before the horse even stopped moving. "Ma'am? Kids? Can y'all hear me?" 7 pairs of eyes, wide, frightened, exhausted, stared back at him. The woman looked up weakly, her face pale, trembling. "Please," she whispered. "Help, my children." She didn't say my out of ownership, Jed noticed. She said it like a prayer. "I got you," he said immediately, no hesitation, no second thoughts. He stripped off his coat, pressing it gently against her shoulder to slow the bleeding. "Name's Jed. We're gonna get you safe." The oldest child, maybe 14, swallowed hard. "Sir, are you really gonna help us? For real?" Jed looked at all of them, 7 kids who looked like they hadn't slept in days, clothes torn from travel, dust caked on their faces. Fear clung to them so thickly it felt like another presence in the air. "For real," he said. "Now come on. We're leaving." It wasn't until he lifted the woman into the saddle and placed the children on his spare horse and wagon that Jed realized how big a decision he'd just made. Not a small-town kind of decision. A life-changing one. The kind a man didn't walk away from. On the way back to his ranch, the woman slipped in and out of consciousness. When she could speak, she told him little pieces enough for him to understand the urgency. They had escaped a dangerous situation in another state, running from a man who meant them harm. They had driven for days, their car eventually breaking down, forcing them to flee on foot. She had been hurt trying to protect the children, not all of them biologically hers, but all of them in her care. Jed listened, jaw clenched. He didn't interrupt. Didn't question. He just kept riding, the weight of their journey pressing on him like a storm cloud. By the time he got them to his ranch, word had already started to spread, first through a neighbor who saw Jed leading 2 horses loaded with kids, then through a ranch hand who recognized distress when he saw it. That's how small towns worked, you didn't have to say anything for folks to start paying attention. Jed carried the woman inside, calling to his sister Maggie, a retired EMT who lived in the guest house. "Help," he said simply, and Maggie looked at the woman, then at the 7 trembling children behind Jed, and nodded without a single question. While Maggie worked on the woman's injuries, Jed made food, real food, warm and hearty. The kids ate silently at first, like they were afraid the meal might disappear. Jed noticed the littlest one sneaking rolls into his pockets. He pretended not to see. Later, when the woman woke, her eyes filled with tears. "Why are you helping us? You don't even know us." Jed settled his hat on his knee, exhaling slowly. "Ma'am, where I come from, a person in need is a person in need. Doesn't matter where you're from or what your story is. And those kids," he glanced toward the living room, where Maggie was teaching them how to braid yarn into bracelets. "They deserve better than fear." What Jed didn't expect was how fast the story spread across Montana. A local deputy came by that evening, not to detain them, but to offer protection. A neighbor dropped off clothes, another offered beds. The small-town radio station picked up the story, calling Jed the quiet hero of the High Plains, a title he didn't much care for but couldn't shake. Within 48 hours, donations poured in from across the state. Strangers offered legal help, counseling, housing, support for the kids. Someone anonymously paid for full medical treatment for the woman. Another family volunteered to foster 2 of the children temporarily if needed. Churches sent meals. Schools offered to enroll the kids immediately. Montana, tough, wild, and proud, had wrapped its arms around 8 strangers simply because one rancher refused to look away. But the moment Jed would never forget happened the next morning. The oldest boy approached him, shifting nervously. "Sir," the boy said, voice cracking, "Mom said you saved our lives." Jed shook his head. "No, son. I just did what anybody would do." The boy looked at him, eyes full of a truth far too old for his age. Not everybody would have stopped. Jed swallowed hard, emotion tightening his throat. "Well," he said quietly, "I did. And I ain't going anywhere. You're safe now." The boy stepped forward and hugged him, just for a second, but it was enough. Enough to undo a grown man's composure. That was the moment, Jed later realized, when the story stopped being about him at all. It wasn't about a rancher helping strangers. It was about what people could become when they chose compassion over caution, humanity over hesitation. When the woman recovered enough to stand, she took Jed's hands in hers. "You saved more than our lives," she said softly. "You gave us back hope." Jed tipped his hat, his voice barely steady. "Guess we all need a little hope now and then." And Montana, rugged, vast, and full of grit, answered back by proving that kindness, when offered bravely, doesn't just help people survive. It helps them begin again.